And then Trevor Packer is going to be with us. And I don't have the specific dates, but I'll post all of that. You can get all of that. So that is all coming up. We just want to say for sure, again, thank you to Perfection Learning. They paid for our Zoom accounts. None of us are making money on this, but they did pay for our Zoom accounts, so we didn't have to pay for that out of pocket this year. So I don't want to take up any more time, but I do want to introduce two of my friends tonight. I'm excited to have Roy Smith and Brian Stabnick with us tonight. Golly, we've known each other. I think I met both of y'all about the same time, and we've known each other for several years. This is what I know about both Roy and Brian. They have teachers' hearts. They are solid classroom teachers. They love students. They love teachers and building other teachers up. They're really committed to good instruction in the classroom, and they're very methodical and thoughtful in their planning. That is something that I have really learned and admired about them, because I tend to be frantic in my planning. So I always watch them and just see how thoughtful they are with their planning, and love that. Both of them have been mentors in different ways through the past few years for me. So I really appreciate that. So tonight, I'm not going to take any more time. Thank y'all, Brian, Roy, for being with us tonight. Excited to learn from you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So this all started a couple of months ago, and actually it started a few years ago because I had interviewed Roy on a podcast that I was running. And I remember he talked about Toni Morrison and the impact her novels had had on him as a reader, and how he had brought them into his classroom and what it done for him as a teacher, for his students, not only in AP, but beyond AP. And it was just something that stayed with me. So as I was thinking of presentation topics for Mosaic this year, I thought it'd be great to talk about Toni Morrison for Roy, Cormac McCarthy for myself, two authors that are near and dear to us, the stories behind the novels and why we teach them, like how we first got exposed to them, what it looks like in our classroom. I know that's a question we get often from teachers. Well, what do you do with this? And then how we fit it into our course in terms of where we place it. How do we prepare students for the AP exam using these texts? So I'm going to turn it over to Roy. He's going to start talking about Toni Morrison for a little bit. And we are going to be like WWE tag team partners tonight. He's going to talk for a little while, pass it off to me. We'll be sharing screens. So sit back, take some notes if you want, or just enjoy.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. And also, Susan, thank you for having us, and especially to all the Mosaic committee for putting this on for teachers. It's just an amazing opportunity, especially during these crazy times, for us all to get together and just share as teachers from one to another. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. How we found these authors, that's an interesting thing for me, because when I talk about how I found Toni Morrison, it's really me talking about my own teaching career, because I can trace my path to Toni Morrison to my evolution as a teacher. Because as a young boy growing up in a very small Southern California mountain resort, I was a reader. I wasn't very good at anything else. Math or science, reading caught me. So I read everything that the teachers threw in front of me, plus everything else. And so I read all the things that, The Outsiders, all these different books that really resonated with me. And then I got to high school, and the thing that, as a teacher now, and I look back, that's so amazing, is we were reading the same books kids are reading in high school today. A lot of schools, 1984, Animal Farm, Huckleberry Finn, all these ones that I read, a long time ago, kids are reading today. But when I went into my junior year, my junior teacher kind of broke from the mold a little bit and taught us As I Lay Dying. Now that doesn't seem like a big jump, but for me, it was a colossal jump, because the way he presented it, the way he talked about it, just got me excited about literature. And it stayed with me, because it was like all of a sudden he wasn't just teaching a book to teach it, he was living the book. And so when I went to college, I was looking forward to more of that kind of interaction with my literature as well as my teachers, but sadly, I didn't necessarily find it that way. You know, we did the British lit, the American lit, the this, the that, the other. And so, and there's nothing wrong. I'm glad I had that because it gave me a good understanding of a wide range of literature. But then I came to a professor named Phil Page, who was a Tony Morrison scholar. And I had him for an American lit class. And one of the books we read was Sula. And the book just blew my mind. Not only the story, but the language, the structure, just the world that I was seeing here that I had never been exposed to. I had never been exposed to this literature, to an African-American author. If I go back in my mind, I know I had to read some, but nothing hit me like this did. And so when that class was over, I went to Professor Page and asked him if I couldn't help arrange a Tony Morrison class. And he goes, well, that's a lot harder than you think. And so I said, well, what can we do? And he said that if I got another 2 students together, we could form an independent study seminar and he'd be happy to lead it. And so that's what we did. And I read all of Morrison's work to that point. And we the 4 of us sat and talked about Morrison for, you know, our whole class period, every week, 3 classes a week. And it got me so excited about literature that I wrote my master's thesis on her first 3 novels. And so this road from being sheltered with my reading to very specific genres, to being exposed to Tony Morrison, which led me to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which led me to another number of other authors that were just, I mean, it was just revelatory for me. And then as I went into my own teaching profession, I wanted that to be what I brought to my students. I didn't want to just teach them under one lane. I wanted to teach them about the world of authors that look like them and authors that didn't look like them, stories that they knew and were comfortable with, but stories that challenged them and made them think through a different lens. Because when I read Morrison, take for example, it doesn't matter, pick any of her books. When I would read them, all of a sudden me, a white male, was allowed into a world and I could see this world from the vantage point of it being the authentic world. And that's what I wanted to give my students. And so when I started teaching AP literature, I said, this is absolutely the perfect opportunity for me to share to my students this magic of Morrison. And I also knew another thing is when I'm excited about what I'm teaching, when I'm enthused, so are my kids. When I got excited about it, they got excited about it. And so that was really the door that led me to her. I spent a whole year writing my master's thesis on her, The Bluest Eye, Sula, and Song of Solomon. So that was the perfect opportunity going into an AP Lit teacher to jump into Song of Solomon is what I decided to do. In a little bit, I'm going to share with you how I go about teaching that, how I place it, how I go, how I help my students to see and to engage this book. And I can tell you now, a little spoiler alert, they love it. They absolutely love it from start to finish. And I've had so many kids going, oh, as soon as we were done, I read Beloved. Oh, I read this, I read that. It's like, I mean, that's teacher heaven, right? That's the home run. That's the slam dunk. That's everything we want. So that's how I got started. That's how I got to oh, one last thing. One of the highlights of my life, and this is no hyperbole, I got to meet Toni Morrison. She was giving a reading on Paradise, and I joined the team that was in a volunteer group. And at the end, I was such a fanboy. It was incredible. I was almost like giddy. And I got to walk up to her, and I felt like I was in the presence of a goddess. And just to shake her hand and stuff, I mean, I still remember that today, and it still gets me kind of the feeling that I had at that point. And so I'm a total fanboy. I admit it. My kids get it. They understand it because I've got this and that in my room. So I'm a Morrison junkie. And so I'm fully addicted, and I'm happy to be. So now I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Brian. Brian and I have known each other for a while now. We've been at the AP reading together. Like he said, I was on his podcast. And truthfully, I've been an admirer of his way before I did meet him. his dedication to teachers, his dedication to students, his dedication to the profession that we all love and share has been inspirational to me for a long, long time. So Brian, it's all yours.
Brian, you're muted.
Thank you so much. So Roy left off by talking about the AP reading, and that is a really bad photo that you see there, not taken by me, but from Google Images of the AP reading. So if you've been an AP reader, I think you could probably make out people huddled in blankets and shivering. So that's been my AP reading experience. But the first time I read for question 3 was 2015. So I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory because I shared this at my AP SIs this summer. 2015 was the question on cruelty. And one of the essays at my table comes in my folder, and it's on 50 Shades of Grey. And that was a memorable essay in my eyes until we get to 2019. So 2019 was the last time I was at the AP reading. It was in Salt Lake City. And the question was about an ideal view of the world. And within this one folder, I had a ton of Frankenstein essays. And as I got halfway through them, all of a sudden it started to switch to the road. So I'm assuming we're switching schools and this teacher had taught the road. And so many of the essays were similar. And they touched upon the father having this ideal view of the world that no longer exists. And he needs to somehow shepherd his son into this world as best he can. And he's going to take any means necessary. And they were somewhat repetitive and somewhat predictable. Then I get to this one essay and it did the opposite. So it talked about how people assume it's the father that has this ideal view of the world. But, and this is where I saw the sophistication point even before we had it on the rubric, this student argued that it was the son who really had the ideal view of the world because he saw his father moving toward this violent, pessimistic view, and it was his job to protect his father. And so in a way, he wanted to keep the ideal view of who his father was. And of course, here I am at the time, I'm the father of a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And this essay is like moving me emotionally. And I actually had to step up and like take a step back from the table because I just loved what this student had to say. And here's the thing, and this is a question that comes up often. Like if you're assigned question 3, what if you're given a book that you have not read before? What do you do with that essay? And I can tell you this, I had not read The Road up until that point. I knew about The Road. I've even had colleagues talk about it, how emotional it was. And for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to read it. But reading that essay on that day, from that moment on, I knew I was going to teach that book. And sure enough, I remember that night, I went out to dinner with Brandon Abden. Sarah Soper was there, Melissa Smith was there, and I'm recounting this story of this essay. And I was just still at that moment in awe of it. And what a wonderful thing when you're an AP reader and you get assigned question 3 and students are teaching us about novels. And think about how amazing this is. I've been teaching this novel for 2 years now, and it all starts with one student's essay in one folder, in a folder of 20 essays, in a room of 294,000 essays. That student's essay moved me to say, I'm going to pick up this book as soon as I get out of this room. And sure enough, I went to a Salt Lake City bookstore, found that book. I told people about it that night. I read it on my flight home. Sure enough, that next year, there I am teaching The Road to my students. And it's this shared journey where I'm saying to them exactly what I'm saying to you. I discovered this book because of a student's essay. And here we are, and we're going to work our way through this together, and we're going to decide what this book can teach us. And we have these great moments teaching the novel, and we have powerful discussions because people are passionate about it one way or the other. Either they love it or they hate it, but it's stirring their emotions. And it all starts with one book, one folder, one essay in a room full of essays. So it kind of reminds me of the AP prompt of a story. In a room full of books in a world of stories, father can't recall one. And here I am sitting there in a room full of all these essays, and this thing is moving me to tears. So for anyone that may have taught The Road and maybe I had your student's essay, I want to say thank you now. But I'm going to turn it back over to Roy because as we start talking about how we got into these authors, of course, now we want to transition to what we do with them and how they work in our classroom. So Roy, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and it's all yours.
Okay. You might hear a little booming in the background from me because it's thundering and raining, which is really kind of unusual for Central Texas right now, but we'll take it. Okay, so I decided out of all the different books that Tony Morrison wrote that I enjoyed the most, I wanted to share with my students was Song of Solomon. Okay, and I've been teaching it for a few years now, but I thought in this segment, I would try to go over why, how, and then what are the things that I focus on. So the first thing is my criteria for selecting a whole class novels has really changed over the last few years. We used to teach about 5 novels. When I say we, I'm fortunate enough to work with 2 just brilliant women, and our team is rock solid. I love them. But we used to teach about 5 novels or more a year. But then we started paring it down, and now we're down to three novels. And last year, quite frankly, we only got to 2 because of the way the year worked out. And also with the new CED and the emphasis, the emphasis is not on Q3. The emphasis is on the other 2, the poetry and the prose. And so we've been cutting it down. And so we're very, very selective on how, or very picky about the novels that we have for our kids. So these are the things that we go through. First of all, it has to be engaging for kids and me. Okay. Some teachers, they really dig the book, but if it's not going to engage the kids, what's the point of it? So and also I don't want to teach something that I hate because then I'm not going to come across as interested or excited about what I'm doing. And so it has to be engaging for the kids and me. And it has to have appropriate content for my kids, school, and community. Let's face it, we all live in different communities with different standards and ideas. And so we have to be aware of that. Although I love to push that, I push it to the limit and beyond, but I'm not going to, there are certain books that I even feel uncomfortable with. And so I want to make sure that it's appropriate for my community. I want to make sure it's the appropriate reading level. And for me, in a whole class novel, when I'm sharing, when they're reading their independent books, that's a different thing. But a whole class novel, I want it to be just above where they are. Because I want them to be reaching for that, because then that's where I come in as the teacher to help them reach higher and to expand their ideas. I want it to be have appropriate complexity for growth in their reading and writing. Where Brian was talking about the reading, and this last year I read Q3 as well. And, it's really cute when somebody used the 3 Little Pigs on their Q3, but let's face it, the level of complexity wasn't there. So I want to make sure that the level of complexity is there. And I want to make sure it's the appropriate placement in my curriculum. If I teach Song of Solomon first, it's not going to have the same bang as where we've chosen to teach it. So I think the placement of our novels and the build of our novels is incredibly important to really be thoughtful about, to give it consideration. And then I want to really consider the diversity of author and subject. I want our reading list to be diverse. I want my students to have a look behind the curtain of every community that I can possibly get in there. And there's just so many works to choose from. There's no reason why we can't do this. There are so many beautiful poems, short stories, novels that represent all the communities in our culture, in the culture around the world. So this is something that we put a big emphasis on. And then also availability. Frankenstein is always, I love Frankenstein. It's always one of the most used books on Q3. And I've talked to a lot of teachers in my AP Summer Institutes, about Frankenstein. They said, well, we teach it mainly because it's the only book we have. And our kids can't afford to buy books. And so then I started asking about, was that why you teach this? Yes, we teach what's in the book room. I'm blessed in that I have a community that supports their kids buying books. And then those kids donate their books. But we have to take availability into our criteria, correct? So that's my list. So Song of Solomon is the last novel I teach before the exam. Okay, very important where it's placed in. It's the last novel I teach before the exam. But to get to this, I'm just kind of playing around. It is a complex, intense situation, selecting these novels in their orders. Why do you put the novels where they are? But these are the 3 novels that we're going to be teaching this year. I'm going to be teaching The Levers by Lisa Coe this year as my opening novel. And if you haven't looked into Lisa Coe's book, I really suggest you do. The kids love it. It's an interesting look into immigration and into family and into just the different relationships that we have outside of our groups, but also through adoption and through some other things. The kids love it. And it also supplies, the narrative structure of that book is challenging, but not beyond where they are when they first come into AP Lit. And so this starts developing the idea of the conflicts and the complexities between characters and the ideas of struggle within as well. And so the lever, and also it's current. And so kids engage with something sometimes because it's current. If I start with Old Madame Bovary first, I'm going to lose them. And if I start with Song of Solomon first, they're not going to get what I need them to get out of Song of Solomon. But the levers lays the foundation for moving on to the next ones. And circled around all these, of course, are poems and short stories and things like that. But this is the first novel. And then we move on to Madame Bovary because we need to touch that base. And we do it in the start of the second semester. And I want to teach something from that era as well. And while my experience with this book over the years is kids don't enjoy it much at first, but grow to love it as we go along, because quite frankly, they don't much care for Madame Bovary herself or Charles, her husband, but it's a good book for them to have and use. But then I end with Song of Solomon before the exam, because now they're ready to read it. They're ready to understand it and deal with the complexities within the story. And like I said, it just would not work if I tried it any earlier than that. So this is one of the things that I want to pass. I've been passing this on in my, again, when I'm working with teachers, is let's be really thoughtful about our builds of not only novels, but short stories and poetry. What do we do first, second, and third? How do we go about preparing and laying the groundwork for our kids? And so finally, I would like to say that I'm talking big picture now. In our next section, I want to give you what to actually do, because I like in all these kind of things, I want something to take away. So I'm going to give you something that you can take away and perhaps use in the next segment. But the big picture that I explore in class when it comes to Song of Solomon, because the story is absolutely beautiful, but it helps me discover, or to help kids look at the tensions and complexities within and between characters. This is that 30,000 foot view. Tension and complexities between characters, how the characters change or remain the same throughout the story. The protagonist, Milkman Dead, is not the same at the end when he takes his heroic flight as he is at the beginning of the story. But other characters do remain the same. And that has something to say as well. Pilot Dead, absolutely my favorite character in all of literature. And if I could go into a magic machine and spend the day with one character in literature, it would be Pilot. She is the strongest, most courageous character for me that I've ever read. And so I like to look at these characters and how she changes from the beginning to the middle to the end. It's stunning. And then the following literary elements and techniques are how the following literary elements and techniques function. And I highlighted the word function, bolded it and underlined it, because this is the key word that I need to get my kids to, is how do these things function in a text? How do they function? It's not enough just to find things. It's not just enough to say this or that. I want to know how the setting functions. As Milkman goes on his journey from north to south, how do these different settings function in the story? The narrative structure, how does that function? Like in The Levers, it's told from different points of view throughout the story. How is that functioning? And then the figurative language, how is it functioning? The conflicts, the contrasts, the perspectives. I want kids to be able to go into question 3 or any of their writing, going to college, understanding that it's not enough to say, found it. Oh, I found it. Here's this. They have to say how it functions. How is it functioning to bring meaning to the work? How is it helping to develop the meaning or meanings of the work as a whole? And so this is the big view of, I would say, in the first 2 novels, I'm building pieces of these things as I go through, but in Song of Solomon, the whole band is playing because they've had the practice throughout the year. And now's the time where I can bring it all together and help them to see how it works in the within the complexity of Song of Solomon. So that's how I build my sequence as we go through. So now I'm going to throw it back to you, Brian. I feel like we're on the news or something here. I love it.
I am going to unmute myself, share my screen again. I have a much simpler criteria for works that I choose. And for me, especially in the past 2 years with the CED, my first rule is, can I use this major work to teach the skills of the CED? And with most books, I'm finding that it's a yes. But here's the other thing that I'm finding, and here's the question that I have to challenge myself to ask every time I select a work. Will this give me the complexity that I'm looking for that will engage my students in nuance? So this is piggybacking off of Roy. Is there going to be complexity of character? Is there going to be complexity of conflict? Is setting going to be complex? Are motifs complex? And complexity is one of the things that I'm after, because if I can help students find that, I think that's my avenue to great classroom discussions where we can tease these things apart and see the nuance and see the layers within them. So that's number one for me, is not just can it teach the skills of the CED, because I think most novels do meet that criteria. It's what can I do with it to help them achieve a degree of sophistication in their thinking, in our discussions, and then certainly in their writing. And then number two, and as a member of the AP Lit Test Development Committee for the, I guess, past 6 years, this was one thing that I tried to champion is this literature that I want to hold up in that sense on the exam, but in this sense in my classroom? So you think of those lists of question 3 novels that have been suggested over the years. I think it's at 14 pages now. We have so much to choose from. So I want to be deliberate in my choices because I want to hold this book up to my students and say, this is worthy of your time. And if I believe that, then it's my job to find a way to make it worthy. And I believe The Road has been worthy of their time. And part of my decision-making process is trying to figure out what might have the best impact in the moment. So certainly over the past 10 years with the rise of social media, I've taught 1984 because I want my students to think about the degree to which surveillance occurs, or the degree to which political manipulation occurs. And now with The Road, and especially coming out of the pandemic, and maybe we're still in it, who knows, I want my students to think about our relationships to others and how we protect others and who we view as the good guys and the bad guys, and if we can even justify that. So for me, this book seems to be my book of the moment. And here's the thing about The Road is I see in a lot of ways simplicity in it, because we have 2 main characters. We have an unidentifiable setting because it's not a very specific location. We have a very simple goal that they want to get to the coast. But what I want my students to do is not ignore that simplicity. Our goal is to find the complexity within that. And the way we started, the way we frame the beginning of the entire novel is to look at the conventions of this genre. So this is coming from my smartboard from this year. We're looking at post-apocalyptic stories, and I had to actually draw an arrow to stories and add movies because most of my students knew post-apocalyptic movies more so than they knew post-apocalyptic stories. But we then tried to figure out the conventions of this subgenre. So number one, this was our list of what we came up with in terms of post-apocalyptic TV shows, films, and books. And from there, we're trying to figure out the commonalities. What are the conventions of this subgenre? And over the course of my 3 AP classes, over that first week when we first were diving into The Road, this is what we had, is that most of them have some type of devastating event. And that event could be a weapon, could be a disease, natural disaster. And here was the thing that we noticed, is that this devastating event doesn't just change the physical world, it changes structures of things, the social structure, the political structure, and other institutions so that they no longer matter. They can't even function anymore. But post-apocalyptic fiction, we always have these survivors, and it's that struggle to survive that matters. And so often, as it says here, when they embark on a quest to search for other survivors and new communities are formed, it's the development of those communities and the bonds within that somehow teach us something about what it means to be human. So from there, we're looking at this lens throughout the novel. We're starting with this. We're going to come to it back at the end, because what we're trying to figure out is why these stories are told in the first place, and in a way, why they are so predictable, and really what these stories are about. Why this subgenre? Why these conventions? And of course, with The Road, for me, it's looking at the way The Road obeys these conventions, and in so many ways, how it seeks to defy them. I'm gonna hand it back to Roy, because now we're gonna get into the nuts and bolts of how we teach it.
Okay. This is one of my favorite quotes from Song of Solomon. If you haven't read it yet, you have to have it on your must-read list, but I love that. For now he knew as Shalimar knew, if you surrendered to the air, you could ride it. And I got to tell you the truth, the first time I read Song of Solomon and I got to this last part and I read this last line, I was like, what? What just happened? Don't stop here. Keep going. Keep going. Tell me what happens next. And it wasn't until I was really able to sit and meditate on it and think about the end of the story and read it again that I understood that it had to end there. And so it's just a beautiful quote, one of many that I could have put up as a header here, but I wanted to share that one. Okay, for me, when I'm teaching whole class novels, it's all about the scenes. And I'm talking here pretty much AP specific type of thing. When kids go to write question 3, I want them to have these ideas of the major work, the meaning of the work as a whole. But at the same time, what I want them to have are scenes that they can use to talk about it, that they can provide their commentary and evidence from scenes. And so a lot in my class of the study time is conversations of us putting up, or me putting up a big question, and then us looking at scenes and saying how they relate and help us understand these developing meanings of the work as a whole. But last year, because of the pandemic, and actually the year before, we had to get a little bit more creative. And as bad as it was, hard as it was, the last year was hard for me. I'm sure it was hard for a lot of you as well. It was a struggle, and it was frustrating many times to get the kids engaged. And heck, I couldn't even tell if they were engaged half the time because I was just looking at icons on boxes. And so we came up, and I put a little thank you here to my teammates, Meredith Lawrence and Kara Sarles, because we work really, really well together. But out of the 3 of us, I'm the worst when it comes to technology and putting things together. And so we have these great ideas, and Meredith took us to slidemania.com. And then from there, we started building what I'm going to share with you now. And it's been a game changer for us. And Susan, can you see what I'm showing here now? Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. So Slide Mania, we came up with this, it's loading, second. We came up with a system here for the kids to be able to use at home electronically, to be able to go through and study and expand and keep their notes for Song of Solomon. And it's worked so well. One thing I loved, I was one of those people that I still like to read papers, like the paper, I like to hold it, but I got much better at reading essays online. And I also found it on some of these things that we're doing, kids didn't lose this. They had them and they had access to them all the time. And so each of our students got a copy of this, an electronic copy of our Song of Solomon journal, which they added their name on the front. We had a picture of Morrison and some other thing. We had a PDF version of Song of Solomon there as well. But let me take you through this journal. We gave them a page where they could add their favorite quotes, just like the quote I gave you. So kids, when they were going through, this was unscripted, ungraded, but they would add notes here. And kids did that because they liked certain quotes, like kids, and they wanted to remember, so they would type them in there. And then as we moved along, we have what we had as our response journal. And so here, the journal will be graded at least once a week. And this was actually easy to grade. And so they would write the date and the slide number of that their assignment was on, because this stays with them the whole way. And so I would give them an assignment, say to do some work with Milkman, to do some work with Pilot or one of the other characters. And so they would give me the date, the slide number and the topic, which assignment it was. And then I would give them their grade and feedback right here in their journal. And so when they would go through, we didn't quite use this many assignments, but this way they could keep track of what they were doing and we could keep track of their grades and assignments. It was so clean and nice. I really, really liked this a lot. And so then moving on through the journal, we had, and there was more. So we had sections just for the major characters. Like in this case, Milkman is the, I guess, the male protagonist in the story. And so we gave them opportunities through our discussions, through their group. Well, once we're in class, back to their group discussions. You know, breakout rooms didn't work as well as I think I'd hoped they would have. But when they're sitting together, you know, let's just write down his physical descriptions. And so kids would write down that one at the beginning of the book, one of his legs is shorter than the other. I wonder why. Why did Morrison include that, that little detail? And then later, when he discovers that foot is no longer shorter in the novel, they go, aha, and they go back to that physical description. But they would describe him in other ways as well, just what he looks like. What were the major influences on Milkman? His father, obviously, Macon dead, major influence, but so was his mother, Ruth. Major, well, guitar, major influence. And so they would write down who were the major influences on Milkman. And then over here, description of those relationships with others. So they would write out, and trust me, kids filled up these whole pages with their notes of their relationship. You know, Milkman's relationship with guitar is a real central idea in the book. And so they would continue to fill these notes as they would go on. Also, we would have him write down the character flaws. You know, what kind of flaws do you know? Milkman is very self-centered in the beginning of the book. He's very much into himself. He's not really, and especially when it comes to the women in his life, he's very into himself. So they would write down that plus other things that they considered flaws. But then they would also write down, I'm jumping around here, epiphanies that they're having about Milkman. And so they're writing these down. So a student would write this down, say we're talking about the first 3 chapters or whatever. So they would write down epiphanies here, but then they would continue this as we move through the book. And so it was a growing journal as they would go through. And then we also had the same thing for Pilot, who I think is, like I said before, the greatest, you know, for me, character in literature. And kids, and it's so funny, isn't it, that when we tell kids that, because I'm very open about this, how all of a sudden they really start looking for why I care so much about her. And it's really interesting how they engage with that. So they would take the same sorts of notes through Pilot's work on her character traits and abilities. And then we had a place for them, a large section actually, for them to write about all the supporting characters, writing in their specific details about the characters, their traits, their relationships, and all the same things, but they would write them down in here. And so this was their chance to, you know, write about the men in Shalimar and the, you know, Macon dead and his wife, Ruth, and all these different things. They would write these down in here, and also looking at their connections to these, the significant events throughout the story. So you can see that this, and we gave them a lot of room because there were a lot of characters for them to be working with. And so most kids filled up almost all of that with different ideas about the supporting characters. The next section we had was scene studies. And this is where, for me, the money's at when it comes to question 3. Kids have to identify that meaning of the work as a whole, and then find those scenes to help explain, to help use for their commentary and evidence. And so what they were doing here, and this was a lot of the work we did as far as graded work as well, they used this section to interpret and analyze key scenes from the novels. We explored the scenes through motifs, themes, literary elements, and techniques. The motif of flying in the book, of course, is one that the kids like to follow. And so they were able to follow these through the different scenes. So this was a key. This is, for me, the most important part of the journal was the scene study. And we gave them plenty of room to do this. We gave them 6, 7, 8, 10 pages. The next one is we have a whole section for the meaning of the work as a whole. And so we give them a little bit of room here. We say, use the space to make notes on the larger thematic subjects you see evolving through the novel. And so we give them some, consider the thematic subjects of love, responsibility, self-actualization, family, wealth, and adulthood. Song of Solomon's a coming of age story. You know, we follow Milkman's journey until he gets that self-realization at the end. And there's many things that the kids will take one of these at a time, and they will write down different scenes and talk about the meaning of the work as a whole. Now, when you connect this to the scene section that came before, you can see how we're setting it up. And also the fact that when we start looking like this, these different thematic subjects, it makes it easier when they get a prompt on question 3. They go, oh, this is about love, dunk, dunk, and then they go that way. So this was an important section as well. And then we have, this is the first place the kids go to, by the way. We gave a supporting materials section and a bunch of videos, you know, who is Tony Morrison? Just different clips that are on YouTube that are readily available. So as soon as I was done with my introductory and I signed the journal, kids all go here first without being assigned. And then we go over some of these in class and talk about them and write about them in our area that it's appropriate. There you go. And then another one of my favorite videos, her video about music and flight, her interview there. So this was an important section as well. More videos. Then we had several links of literary criticism about Song of Solomon as well. And so these, and I'm anticipating this being even much better than when we're in person. But when we look at the different areas and assign them, especially to the kids' interest in the motifs and the themes that they're following, like love and what Morrison calls anaconda love, the kind of love that just chokes you to death, you know, and so they could read then some literary criticism on this work as well, and then do that work in their journal, which also translates to the AP exam as well. And then we have a section just for writing, just for them to do free writing and other things. So we might have them write a brief paragraph or 2 paragraphs. And so that is the journal. I want to jump back. Let's see if I can do this. Well, let me go ahead and kick it over to Brian, but I guess the last thing I was going to say, you don't need to read it on a screen, was the last thing I was going to say is what this became and what this becomes for you and your students is a study guide. They have a study guide that's prepared for them that the night or 2 nights before the exam, it's all in one spot that the kids can go back and review all of this instead of going, you know, losing their papers or losing this or that. It's like, man, it's right there. Jump in and look at it. So that's the biggest thing that I think I can share with you that was the most meaningful for my kids last year. So Brian, you're up.
All right, thank you, Roy. So I'll share 7 things that I did with the road, starting with where we begin. And I have plenty of huge black paper that I get from the art teacher, you know, like in the big roller. And one of the first things that we do is we tape an entire span that goes the whole length of the back wall, because we are literally building the road in our classroom. And I'm going to tell my students this early on. I'm going to say to them that there are just exquisite sentences in this novel. And what I want you to do, the first 2 minutes of a period, maybe even before the bell rings, or those last 2 minutes when we're done at the end of the day and we're kind of just packing up and hanging out, if you've got a sentence that you think is exquisite as well, just grab a piece of chalk and put it on the back wall. And I encourage them to do artwork with it if they want. But as we're moving chronologically through the novel, we're chronologically building those exquisite sentences on the back wall. You know, it usually takes that first student to take that first step. And the 2 years that I've done this, it's always that early sentence that you remember the things that you want to forget and forget the things that you want to remember. But once one student gets that up on the back wall, then we're off and running. And what I love about that is it's almost like artwork, that it's up there to be admired. And it's something that every day that you come in class, there may be something new. So kids do check it out to see what other quotes people have put. If someone's put their quote up there before they have and they've wanted to, what artwork goes with it. And it's just a way to celebrate good writing. The other thing that we do a close reading early on in the book. He sat and ran his hand around in the works of the gutted machines. And in the second one, closed over a cold metal cylinder. He withdrew his hand slowly and sat looking at a Coca-Cola. What is it, Papa? It's a treat for you. And with all of my students, I bring in mini Cokes. We have everyone get a mini Coke. We have one other teacher that we just grab from the hallway, give her my cell phone. She takes a video of every student opening up the Coca-Cola cans all at the same time. And then it gets shared around the classroom. The video itself, because then students put it on, like, I think it's TikTok, maybe Instagram. But it's just one of those cool moments, because after we're done with the close reading and analyzing the motivation, the language, the sacrifice on the part of the father, that it's a moment to just kick back and enjoy a treat, because certainly that doesn't happen often during their school day, where they just get to sit back and relax for a little bit. So that's a memorable thing, because then it lives on virtually through TikTok and Instagram. Up next is this cool article I found about relationships. So I'll go to the article itself, because about halfway through the novel, we start applying this to the father and son. So they say that, and this was changingminds.org, there is the before meeting phase, but I love how they have all these subcategories within each phase. And with phase one, before meeting, I want my students to speculate on who the father was before the son was even born. And we get scant evidence of that, but I want them to draw inferences. And I'm probably going to say that word a lot over this session here, is just inferences, inferences, inferences. And then, of course, as they're setting out on this journey, it's them feeling each other out. It's the getting to know you phase. And then certainly there are moments like when the son has to handle the gun, getting close. But then when do they reveal secrets? That's the kind of question that I want to ask my students. Who is seeking more contact? When do they seem to dance to and fro? And here's where I'm getting at that complexity that I'm after, where it's not just a one-dimensional relationship, that it follows a lot of the structures of typical relationships, that there is maybe a honeymoon phase at a certain point, there is storming, there is stabilizing. So I love doing this because, as I said earlier, I'm using this novel to teach complexity. And for my students, they may see this story as simplistic, but doing activities like this, I'm achieving layers, because we're seeing that it isn't so one-dimensional. Going back to the slides. So obviously fire is symbolic within the road, but I believe this, that the best symbols in literature are not just one-to-one connections, that to truly see the value of symbolism and for it to be executed well, it needs to have multiple dimensions. So the University of Michigan has a fantastic online symbolism dictionary. That's where I took part of this definition. And what I'm asking my students to do in group work is to illuminate when these different definitions or the different meanings of fire are contextualized within the road. So I think symbols vary depending on context, depending on moment. And what I want them to do is understand the dimensions that fire exists within the road. This is one of my favorites. So I, on the smartboard, have a male figure, I have a boy figure. Students are working in groups of 3. I have huge chart paper. They come and trace basically the whole dimension of the smartboard, the male body, the boy body. And then what I want them to do is tell me who these characters are based on evidence from the text. How do they think? What are they using their hands for? What's in their hearts? What is the pit in their stomach? What moments are their legs important? And what I want them to do is gather evidence from the text for each part of the body that they're going to annotate. And then I want them also to draw inferences from that evidence. So if we go back to the AP Lit rubric, this is my chance to teach them about evidence in commentary, but to do it in a backhanded way where I'm not pulling up the rubric and telling them to find 5 pieces of evidence and then give me commentary for each. So in a book in which these characters seem so distant from us because there is so little description, this is a way to see that the physical is one part of it, but I'm also looking at the mind, the emotion, and as well as the action. I think this is something I stole from Roy, and I do this with every novel that I teach now because this has been by far the best review for question 3 on the exam. Roy, was this one of your things?
Well, I don't think anything is any of our things. I think I probably heard it from somebody, then just tweaked it to me. I think everything is kind of, we just take it and make it our own.
So 6 scenes to themes. When we are finished with the novel, I have my class vote on the 6 most important moments or the most important scenes within any novel. So we might have a running list of 12 to 15, then we vote on it, cut it down to like 8, then from 8, try to cut it down to 6. And here's what it looks like in the road. So this was my period 1 class from this past year, and Father shoots the outlaw. So we get a summary of what exactly happens, a 2 to 3 sentence synopsis, and I want specific evidence as to what happens in that moment. But then students have to talk about the significance of that moment. So that's where we get that connection to theme. So I've always explained to my students that question 3 is very much like the butterfly effect, because in question 3, you're always asked to look at something small, a character who has an ideal view of the world, acts of cruelty. Let me think of another one from previous years. I'm blanking. I'll get to it in a second because I have another slide with it. But what I want my students to do is pick out the 6 most important scenes in the book and show me how those scenes, that butterfly effect, connect to the book as a whole. So of course, with the butterfly effect, a butterfly in Southeast Asia flapping its wings could cause a tornado in Kansas. How does the father shooting the outlaw connect to the book as a whole? Or if I scroll down, when they come upon the seller that harvests people, doing this assignment after the road, so many students came back 2 days after the AP Lit exam, told me that the bunker with supplies, they wrote about that for question 3, about a sense of home, and how in that moment, they were able to recreate this. And doing this sheet helped them immensely, because not only were they able to give specific evidence, they saw the significance of that moment and how it connects to the work as a whole. So sometimes I'll divide students up into groups and they have to do it themselves. Sometimes we do it as a whole class. So I've gone about it different ways, but think about it this way. So if you follow the CED and you do 3 major works of fiction and you do 6 scenes to themes for each work, a student is going to walk into the AP Lit exam. When they see question 3, they are going to have 18 specific moments from novels or works of drama that they can then connect to that question. And I think that's great preparation, knowing that this is something that exists on 2 to 3 pages. So if they do that for every book, I'm not giving them like 20 to 30 pages to study and memorize. This one here is exactly at 40 pages. So I love this activity because in a way it kind of crystallizes the important moments of a book. It connects them each to a broader theme, and then they have to write about that, hopefully with sophistication. Finally, and this goes back to what I said earlier about our beginning question. So, and I see it in the chat, do I give them specific themes? I don't. I have a sheet that lists 50 common subjects in literature, but I always tell my students, subjects are a way to get to a theme. Subjects are what a work is about. Theme is what it's saying. So I encourage them to use that list of subjects to then develop their own themes. And the slide you see here is where we finish. So in a novel like The Road, what happens to us as readers when we're devoid of so many of the things that we expect? And this goes to the conventions of post-apocalyptic fiction, the conventions of traditional novels where we have identifiable characters and identifiable settings. And this is our closing Socratic Seminar, where we kind of just hash it out because some of my students do not like this novel, and that's okay with me. The Socratic Seminar is their chance to voice that. Some of my students love it and will like die on that hill, as Jackie Smith said to me last week in my APSI, because they believe this is the book that defines their senior year. But what I want my students to do is to be able to justify their opinions with evidence from the text. So if my students are traditional and love Pride and Prejudice, which we read earlier in the year, and prefer that because it's predictable with characters and setting and so forth, but I want to have that open forum where we can talk about not only the quotes that we have on the back wall and the exquisite writing, also the things that made this novel stand out to them. And for me, this is a novel that I want to teach, especially in our current circumstances, because it talks about what is our responsibility to each other. Roy, back to you.
Okay, I'm going to go through this next section quickly because I know we're up against our time and I know we're we're getting tired. You know, I think the one thing I learned this summer was it's exhausting being on the computer all day. It really is. But I wanted to tie this last part that we're going to be talking about is the CED and how we kind of tie these things together. And I know for me, the CED was a focusing agent because it helped me to focus the course, because before the CED, I thought I had to teach everything under the sun. You know, every term, every this, every that. And the CED really helped me focus down. And so for Morrison, just like I said, real quickly, I want to kind of tie it up here over the span of the year. And I follow the CED pretty dang closely for the first semester, except I more rotate things around as far as poetry around everything. But over the span of the year, my kids practice all the CED skills for units 3, 6, and 9, and many others. It's just a matter of the repetition. It's that circular spiraling that I'm going for. And so we get that all. In addition to the Song of Solomon journal work that we do, we cap our study with a Q3 timed writing about 10 days before the exam, where we give them a prompt that, well, and like I said on the bottom pointer, I've never seen a prompt that Song of Solomon can't be used with. But we give them a prompt that's pretty approachable, and we have them write that timed writing just to give them a final practice with timed writings before they're going into the exam. And also gives me a chance to give them that last minute feedback, which is always rah, you're ready, go get them type of feedback. But it really sends them into the exam with some confidence that they've done it. And I don't tell them they have to use Song of Solomon. You know, they can use whatever book works for them. The reality is about 80% of my kids use Song of Solomon. Okay, because they feel so comfortable with it. And a lot of them use the levers this year too, by the way. And I think I saw one at the reading this year. I saw one levers, but you know, it really worked well for them. And so the other thing I said before when I was looking at the journal, one thing I would encourage you to think about a journal like that was the review aspect of that guide was just outstanding this year. That's what the kids talked about when I gave them the end of the year survey of what things were really meaningful for them. It was meaningful for them to have actually a self-written study guide for that book before they went into the exam. This year, we're creating the same journal for the levers and for Madame Bovary, because we didn't really stumble on to this until a little bit later in the year last year. So this coming year, they will have 3 different journals that they'll be able to review and use going into that exam. And then finally, just to wrap it up as far as the alignment assessment, we go through prompts and I'll line up like 10 prompts and then we'll discuss how we would use Song of Solomon for this. And if they can't use Song of Solomon, which other book would they use? And almost every one, the kids can find an aspect of Song of Solomon that makes perfect sense with the AP Lit exam. And so we're going to keep teaching it. It's the one I bore easy as a teacher. It's a fault. I bore easy, so I'm changing things all the time. But it's my one anchor work that I'm going to continue to use until something better comes along. So I'm probably just going to continue to use it. But Beloved would work just as well. You know, there's a number of works would do the same job. But for me, Song of Solomon is the one that touches my heart the most. And I know if it does that for me, it does that for kids. So I'm going to throw it back to you now, Brian.
All right, thank you. So like Roy, I bore easily. I also stole this idea from Carol Jago. And she told me once that she tried to teach something new or something that she got away from every year. So I like that idea of incorporating new things. So the road seems to be my newer work. I've only taught it for the past 2 years, but I hope it stays with me for a while. I divide the novel up into 4 weeks. We do 4 sections because there are no chapters and there's no clear demarcations. So I just find good spots to end. I do like 1 short reading quiz a week just to check to make sure that they're reading. But here's the big thing is we end it with Q3. And almost like Roy just said there, I'm giving them 4 different Q3 prompts to choose from, partly because I want them to see how well this novel functions for that question on the exam. And also I want to give them options so that I don't get stale reading the same essay over and over again. So here are the Q3s that I like. The ideal view of the world, which is the one that got me into this novel in the first place. A character that's been given a gift, whether it's literal or figurative. Cruelty, and the coming of age prompt from 2013. The other thing I'll say about this is, by far, as I said earlier, this is the novel that produces the strongest emotions in my students, the best discussions. And I also think, just like with the road wall of quotes on the back wall, the best engagement. Engagement in the sense that students are doing more physically with this book, whether it's the body character silhouettes or the quotes on the back wall or the Socratic seminars where we're feeding off of each other. I feel like it's a novel where students learn so much from each other, because on the surface it seems somewhat simplistic, but our discussions yield so much complexity. I think now we'll open it up to questions for people that have questions on anything that we do or how we do it.
So Roy, one question actually that I had, and I saw some other people too, do you do these electronic online notebooks with all three of your novels?
Last year, we only did it with Song of Solomon because, quite frankly, last year was so hard
Yeah.
that we didn't really get it working the way we wanted it to work until Song of Solomon. But this year, we are going to do them with all three novels. We're currently working on the Levers, and we will do with Madame Bovary as well.
Mm-hmm. Who else? Questions? Okay, hang on. I'm unmuting a couple of people. So Benjamin, I think I just unmuted him.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Actually, this could be answered by any of y'all. And I have not graded for AP Lit. I am mostly an AP Lang, but I do teach both. Dealing with the Q3 and having the Q3 being not, the scores went down. I was talking to some of my fellow teachers, and they said that if a kid did not connect it to today's world or today's society, that's how they got knocked down. Is that, I want to, A, is that true? And B, how do you get that style and sophistication point, I guess?
Yeah, Roy and Brian, how do you get that sophistication point? Tell us.
I've
Well,
always
let's
been
see.
told that to reward students for what they do well. So I don't know if any essay has been knocked down for not having something. I think we try to find the points that are there, and if it's not there, then it's not there. But it's not like students get penalized for not having something. But yeah, I don't think essays get knocked down. I think you're looking for exactly what the rubric outlines. So number one, we need a strong thesis. And I think it's easy, and this is a phrase I'm going to borrow from Roy, the thesis can be low-hanging fruit. But what we really want to challenge our students to do is develop a more sophisticated thesis that shows nuance of thought, not a simplistic understanding. Because if you do that, that's going to set you up to have stronger evidence and commentary and claims within your body paragraphs. And I think it is sequential in that way, that the strong thesis leads to better evidence and commentary. And better evidence and commentary is a way to get toward that sophistication point.
And I can add that I've read question 3 for 3 different years. Never, ever have I heard anybody say, nor have I ever reduced a score because they didn't connect it to today or whatever that happens to be. What Brian said is right, and that's the guiding principle, is you reward a student for what they did well. And so, no, you don't anticipate what they could have done. So that's out. And sophistication point, I probably have I don't worry that much about the sophistication point, to tell you, because to me, row B. The money is in row B and row A. Row A is pretty easy to get, but if I can get my kids to the 3 and 4 level in row B, my kids are in good shape to, get to that 4 or 5 level. But when kids are approaching that sophistication point, if I can work with them and show them and the class as a whole examples of essays that earn the sophistication point, a lot of times through that modeling, they're able to see it and continue to experiment and practice. And so that's worked well for me, but I just truthfully don't spend a lot of time on row C.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think what Benjamin might be referring to is somebody on the sophistication point on row C, that broader context subpoint. you know how on the rubric it has very specific bullets, like you explore complexities and tensions, and you know, that of course theme, alternative interpretations, you know, great style that's consistent, vivid, persuasive. But I think that broader context is probably what the person intended. And I know in our review sessions, Carlos did a fantastic one talking about sophistication. And I think some folks in the AP Daily videos as well. But Carlos really, it sounds so funny, but he really simplified the discussion about the sophistication point. So, you know, you may want to check those out on YouTube, because I think he kind of busted down and was that broader context, and that it's not some esoteric beast that people can't, you know, tame or something.
Roy, I saw another question come up about your online notebooks really generated a lot of discussion tonight. So it's fantastic. Did you notice a lot of kids, since they were online, copying and pasting from one another?
No.
Good.
But at the same time, you know, I read them all, but I read them at different levels of intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Know that, because if it's an assignment, I read those closely. And so I really didn't. And, you know, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Sure.
You know, kids have always cheated. Kids will cheat. And I don't build my class around that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have a problem building up, then of course I address it. But and not just me, but, you know, Meredith and Kara as well, none of us saw that kind of cheating because it was so individual. And, you know, it's not like academic writing, it's their own voice writing. And by that time, you start knowing who they are. Right. So it's pretty easy to see if they were using the same work. Yeah, I don't know, that cheating's a big issue, but have never been one to put a lot of my energy into that as much. I'm trying to get the kids that want to be there to learn.
Yep. Okay, it is 9:08. It's a school night for me. So I think we're done. So guys, Brian, Roy, I can't thank you enough. I'll put this recording up on AP Lit. Help tomorrow with the slide deck if y'all are willing to share it. I just know this was so just practical, inspirational, all of that. So thank y'all for just sharing with us tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope y'all are looking in the chat and just seeing all of the thank yous coming in. So it was great.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everyone.
Yes, thank you all for coming, spending time with us.
See all y'all next week.
Bye-bye.
Wow, Brian's out already. So thanks, Roy.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great.
Just waiting to see if anybody else had any last minute something. Bye, Tiffany. All right.
Well, enjoy your
Hey,
last
Roy, where are you
Yeah.
in Central Texas?
I'm in Round Rock.
Okay, I'm in Coppell, so you're about
Okay.
3 hours south of me. Okay,
Yeah, no, I'm in just outside of Austin.
and it's raining there. Yeah.
Raining hard.
And it's below normal, just to let you know. It's like 90 here, so that's like winter.
It's like being cold.
I know. So thank you.
Thank you, man.
Okay, Roy, I'm
right,
closing this out. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Bye-bye.
Bye.